In the late afternoon of June 30th, 2013, Brendan McDonough sat in a truck on a fire road in central Arizona. He didn't know it at the time, but he was listening to the last radio transmission from the other 19 men on his crew. He was 21 years old, the crew's lookout, pulled from his own position less than an hour earlier when a thunderstorm forced him to retreat. The crew was in a drainage west of the town of Yarnell. The wind had reversed, and the fire was on top of them. The Yarnell Hill fire was the largest loss of a wildland fire crew in the history of the country, and the deadliest day for American firefighters since the September 11th attacks. 2 state agencies investigated the incident. One concluded that there had been no negligence and that the decisions made that day had been reasonable. The other cited willful violations of safety standards. Both findings still stand and have never been reconciled with each other. The Granite Mountain Hotshots were a wildland firefighting crew based in Prescott, Arizona, certified as an Interagency Hotshot Crew in 2008. The highest tier of qualification in wildland firefighting. They were one of only a handful of hotshot crews employed by a municipal fire department rather than a state or federal agency. The men were employees of the City of Prescott Fire Department. The crew's superintendent was Eric Marsh, 43, who had founded Granite Mountain and led the effort that produced its certification. The captain was Jesse Steed, 36. The other 17 men on the crew that day were Clayton Whitted, Travis Turbeful, Robert Caldwell, Andrew Ashcraft, Travis Carter, Dustin DeFord, Christopher McKenzie, Grant McKee, Sean Misner, Scott Norris, Wade Parker, John Person Jr., Anthony Rose, Joe Thurston, William Wernicke, Kevin Wojcik, and Garrett Zuppiger. Their ages on June 30th, 2013, ranged from 21 to 43. The fire that took their lives began on June 20th, 2013, ignited by a lightning strike in steep terrain approximately a mile west of Yarnell, a community of around 650 residents. Yarnell was in chaparral country, characterized by dense, dry, woody brush that is naturally prone to wildfires. Many of the chaparral species have adapted to require fire for their seeds to germinate, while others can resprout from the remaining roots left after a burn. By the morning of June 30th, the fire had grown to between 300 and 500 acres, and the Arizona State Forestry Division had dispatched additional resources, including the Granite Mountain Hotshots. The Yarnell chaparral had not burned in more than 45 years, and the area was experiencing a severe drought. Decades without a wildfire had left the chaparral overgrown and so dense in places it was nearly impenetrable. The ground conditions were primed to carry a wildfire fast and hot, and the weather conditions were compounding the danger. Single-digit humidity, temperatures near 100 degrees, and afternoon thunderstorms producing strong, erratic outflow winds. At the 7 a.m. briefing, Marsh was assigned as Division Alpha Supervisor on the southern flank, with Steed running the crew on the ground. The Structure Protection Supervisor identified 2 safety zones for their division: the Black and the Boulder Springs Ranch, a defensible clearing on the southwest edge of Yarnell, visible from the ridge across a steep, brush-filled box canyon. Hotshots work close to active fire. Their primary safety mechanism is the Black, the burned area where the fire has already consumed all available fuel. It is the closest thing to a guaranteed safety zone in wildland firefighting. And under extreme fire behavior, the standard procedure is to move into it. That morning, Granite Mountain had hiked in, anchored the fire's edge, and began cutting line along a 2-track road on the ridge above Yarnell, the Black at their backs. They were exactly where they were supposed to be. In the early afternoon, a thunderstorm cell developed approximately 30 miles to the northeast. It produced rain, but the rain evaporated before reaching the ground, bringing the fire no water, only wind. At 2:02 p.m., and again at 3:26 p.m., the National Weather Service relayed updates to the fire's behavior analyst predicting outflow winds of 40 to 50 miles per hour from the north-northeast. The operations section chief confirmed by radio that Marsh had received the 3:26 p.m. update. From his lookout position on the slope below the crew, with a view of both the fire and the developing storm, Brendan McDonough watched the wind shift and the fire move past his preset trigger point around 3:50 p.m. He radioed that his post was no longer tenable. A lookout whose position becomes unsafe pulls back, and the watch passes to someone still in the clear. Brendan was hiking out when, at approximately 3:55 p.m., the superintendent of the Blue Ridge Hotshots, another crew working the fire, picked him up in a UTV and drove him away from the fire. He then helped move the crew's vehicles clear of the fire. It was from Marsh's truck that he heard the crew's final radio transmission. Sometime after 4:04 p.m., the Granite Mountain Hotshots left the black. They started southeast along a 2-track road on the ridge top, and at approximately 4:20 p.m., they descended from the road into the box canyon between them and Boulder Springs Ranch. The ranch was visible in the distance, but the actual route was not. The terrain looked like a manageable hike from the descent point. What the crews could not see was that the route was strewn with boulders, covered in dense unburned chaparral, and longer than it appeared. Marsh communicated the movement over radio. He told the Blue Ridge superintendent, "I want to pass on that we're going to make our way to our escape route." The receiving operators took him to mean the crew was moving through the black. No one on the fire understood they had committed to the box canyon. The post-incident finding identified the failure as a chronic feature of wildland fire communication. Brief, informal, and vague radio transmissions that worked under normal conditions and could not carry the load when it mattered. At approximately 4:18 p.m., the thunderstorm's outflow boundary reached the northern end of the fire. By 4:30 p.m., it had reached the southern perimeter where the crew was descending. The fire reversed and ran south toward Yarnell at a rate of speed the Sayres reconstruction estimated at 10 to 12 miles per hour through dry chaparral. Fire intensity and flame lengths approximately doubled. The box canyon crew had descended into what was a chimney, a terrain feature where convective heat builds its own updraft, accelerating the wind and multiplying the rate of fire spread. The reversed fire reached the canyon while they were still in it. At approximately 4:39 p.m., the crew reached a small opening in the drainage. Smoke had closed in, and flames were coming over the ridge behind them and rising in the canyon ahead. They had less than 2 minutes to improve a shelter deployment site. They cut brush with chainsaws and burned out around themselves to clear ground. At 4:41 p.m., Marsh transmitted, "I'm here with Granite Mountain Hotshots. Our escape route has been cut off. We are preparing a deployment site, and we're burning out around ourselves in the brush." In those same minutes, an air tanker was circling the southern end of the fire. Marsh had asked for a drop directly on the crew's position, but that location didn't reach the aircraft. The radio traffic in those minutes was broken and crowded. Heavy smoke had closed over the drainage. With no position or line of sight to the crew, a drop was not made. A fire shelter is a personal protective device of last resort. An aluminum foil and silica fabric tent designed primarily to reflect radiant heat. It is not engineered for direct flame contact or for the convective heat of a chaparral firestorm. In the conditions inside that drainage, with temperatures that exceeded 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, no shelter could have saved anyone, regardless of how correctly it was deployed. And the post-incident analysis was clear on this point. The men did everything they had been trained to do. The fire passed over the deployment site for several minutes. All 19 men died of heat and direct flame contact. The site was reached by an Arizona Department of Public Safety helicopter at approximately 6:10 p.m., approximately 675 yards west of Boulder Springs Ranch. The fire continued toward Yarnell, where it would burn approximately 127 homes before it was contained. No civilians perished. The Arizona State Forestry Division Serious Accident Investigation Report was published in September 2013. It found that the proximate cause was the thunderstorm outflow, that the crew had been caught in unburned fuel after moving from the black, and that the fire shelters had been deployed in conditions beyond their design tolerance. They found no negligence on the part of any individual. Its overall conclusion was that the judgments and decisions of personnel on the fire had been reasonable under rapidly evolving conditions, and that firefighters had performed within their scope of duty. The communications failure was identified as a systemic deficiency rather than an individual one. The Arizona Division of Occupational Health and Safety investigated separately. ADOSH cited the State Forestry Division for serious and willful violations of occupational safety standards, including failures in lookout coverage, communication of hazardous conditions, and identification of escape routes and safety zones. The original fines totaled $559,000. The state contested the citations. These are both findings of the same disaster. The state agency with operational responsibility for the crew investigated itself and found no negligence. The state agency responsible for occupational safety investigated and found willful violations. Both reports remain in the public record. Neither was ever fully reconciled with the other. 13 of the 19 men had been classified by the city of Prescott as seasonal employees rather than full-time, making their families ineligible for the lifetime survivor benefits the families of the 6 full-time crew members would receive. The city's initial position was that extending those benefits would be both legally impossible and financially ruinous. After public pressure, the Prescott Retirement Board ruled in favor of one family, the Ashcrafts, after a 2-day hearing. The classification of the other men was never reformed. In June 2014, 12 of the 19 families filed a wrongful death suit against the state of Arizona. It was settled the following year for $50,000 per family, and a list of 32 changes the State Forestry Division agreed to implement, including communication protocol reforms and revised guidance for fire shelter deployment. The same agreement resolved the state's appeal of the ADOSH fines. In lieu of paying the $559,000 in penalties, the State Forestry Division agreed to provide safety training and pay $10,000 to each of the 19 families' dependents. No criminal charges were filed, and no individual was found negligent. At least 3 of the 19 families have not received full pension benefits. The deployment site on a slope above the Box Canyon was designated as Granite Mountain Hotshots Memorial State Park in 2016. 19 granite plaques line the trail that leads to it, one for each man. At the site itself, 19 rock-filled steel baskets joined by a chain create a ring around the ground where they deployed, and 19 crosses inside the ring mark where each man was found. Brendan McDonough was 21 years old when he sat in the truck listening to the radio. In the years that followed, he was diagnosed with PTSD, struggled with his survival itself, and eventually wrote a memoir of the experience. he has continued to advocate for wildland firefighter safety. Why the crew left the black is the question the investigation could not answer. The men who could have explained it died beside each other in a drainage they had reached after walking less than a mile from a position where they had been safe. The most rigorous accounts of that afternoon arrive at the same place: the deployment site, the men in their shelters, and a question that has no living witness. That's the report on the Yarnell Hill fire. Thanks for watching Cold Wreckage.